Hi, I'm Ali, and today I will be going through the activities in Codecademy's Python course as a substitute for my final exam in MMS 141. So I chose to do this instead because I won't be able to physically go to my learning center on the weekend because of an out-of-country family trip. While this may be so, going through the course and its interactive lessons was a great learning experience for me. So, let's get started. Okay, so as you can see here, I am at the Codecademy website with my profile set that says Oisami Valencia, which is me. So if we scroll down here in the completed skills, you can see that the Python course is right here. When I click it, it says so that I have successfully completed it. So this course has a total of 12 topics without the final project, since it requires a pro upgrade in the website. So just completing all the 12 topics will let me finish the whole course. So in this screencast, I will be going through each and every one of this topic and explain what I have learned and all my reflections and the challenges I've faced while going through them. In Python syntax, we have two sub-lessons. The first one is Python syntax itself, and the second one is called the tip calculator. To briefly explain, Python syntax includes the actual lessons that need to be learned, while the tip calculator is like a mini activity that practices the lessons that were mentioned in Python syntax. So Python syntax mostly includes the basics, which are the variables, data types, whitespace, comments, and math operations. The topics in this section are mostly familiar to me since I've already learned them beforehand in my Automate the Boring Stuff with Python lessons. So to briefly explain what I know and learned is that variables store data types. So for example here, my variable is the variable name and 10 is its data type. Now here next is booleans. Booleans are also a type of data type that only has true or false and nothing else. Next are whitespace. Whitespace are simply indentations in the code, very essential indentations in the code. Comments are simply the programmer's comments in the code, and they don't affect the final output of the program itself. Now, math operations are self-explanatory. They are math operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and with their assigned symbols. Now in exponentiation, of course, Python also has exponentiation by using the double asterisk symbol. And also we have a operator called modulo. Now modulo returns the remainder of two divided values. So for example, this is a modulo. It uses the percent symbol. It will divide 7 to 2, and then whatever the remainder is, that's the returned modulo. So tip calculator combines all of those lessons here. So in this mini project, what is needed to do is to take the total of a full course meal. So if we look at the final source code right here, meal, tax, and tip are variables with numeric data types. Now here in the next code, meal is reassigned with a formula with math operations. So here meal is added to meal time times tax, which is here. And then a total variable is created that again adds the meal right here. Since it's reassigned, the meal is equal to this formula now, and then multiplied by the tip here. So that's how one way of using variables is that you store a data type or a value in a variable, and you can use it in a different kind of variable. Number 2, we have strings and console output. Again, we have two sub lessons here. Strings and console output include the lessons themselves, and date and time combines all of that by doing a mini activity. Okay, so here we have strings, string methods, printing, and advanced printing. So from what I understood, strings are data type, is a kind of data type that can contain letters, numbers, and symbols. But by doing so, we need to use either quotation marks or an apostrophe for this. String methods include the functions dot lower, dot upper, and str. So dot lower, you can type in, for example, the variable. This is the variable that contains a string. Now you can type in the variable and then a dot lower. So dot lower simply lowercases the characters of the string. Now dot upper uppercases the characters of the string. Now str, this is not a dot notation, so str here turns non-strings into strings. So instead of putting the variable in front, you put in the variable in the parentheses. Why they're different is because the functions dot upper and dot lower can only be used through strings, while the str function, can be used in different data types. Next is print. Now print you simply do it by typing in the word print itself, and then you can use a string for that. So what it's going to do, for example, is that it's simply going to print Monty Python in the final output of the program. So next is the advanced printing. Okay, so in here we have string concatenation. Now string concatenation adds in, you can add strings by using the addition operator. So if you type this in, it would return spam and X because these three strings have been combined using the addition operator. Now we also have string formatting with the % symbol. Now what this does is that you store in the string inside a variable right here, and then you type in with print a string that looks like this. Now the % symbol with here would stand, you type in first the % symbol here with a letter, and then when you type in the % symbol, you need to type in a parentheses that include the variables of what you want to put in your sentence respectively. Okay, so here in date and time, string formatting with the % symbol is practiced. So I'm going to go through the end of this activity. So the objective of this mini project is to print in this kind of format of the date and time in this exact moment. So what we need to do is that month comes first, and then day, and then year, and then in the time we need to type in the R, and then the minutes, and then in the seconds. Now to do this, string formatting is the best way to use. So if we look at the final source code here, in this part of the lesson, importing is not completely introduced, but we use it anyway. So the module date time, we can take the exact date and time in this exact moment. So for that, we created a variable called now that is equal to the date time, which is this dot now. Now to print in this format, what I did was again to type in a % symbol with a letter to stand in strings for each of the dates and the time. So I typed in between these % is the symbol of the slashes and the colons. Now after the string, I typed in again the % symbol, and then in the parentheses I typed in now which is our variable right here, which takes the date time. And then we type in respectively in this sequence the month first, and then the day, year, and then the hour, minute, and second. What's going to happen is that it's going to print all of these in sequence too in our string. So if we look at it, that is today's date. Number 3, we have conditionals and control flow. Under this, we have again 2 lessons, conditionals and control flow, and the activity Pig Latin. In conditionals and control flow, I was introduced to comparators, Boolean operators, and conditional statements. Now again, I was already familiar with this when I read them because I've already learned them beforehand. So in comparators, what they do is they compare 2 values. So they compare 6 ways: if it's equal to, not equal to, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. In Boolean operators, of course, since it's Boolean, it only returns either true or false. So we have and, or, and not. In and, if both are true, if both true values are true, then it's true. In or, if either one of the values is true, then it's true. And not simply returns the opposite value. So if the value is false, it returns it as true, or if the value is true, it returns it as false. Now in conditional statements, we have if, else, and elif. Now if, I'm just going to read, if is a conditional statement that executes some specified code after checking if its expression is true. So this only executes if it's true. So for example, here we have a variable that is left. If answer is equal to left, the code under it will execute. So since answer is equal to left and if answer is equal to left, when we enter the code will execute. So an elif does the same. If you have another if conditional statement to add, you can simply use an elif again. And an else, I'm just going to read this: if this expression is true, run this indented code block. Otherwise, the otherwise is the else, run this code after the else statement. So for example here, if the answer is equal to this string, then return it as true. But if it's not equal to this, the answer to that lies in the else statement, so it will just return false. Here in Pig Latin, the main objective is to create a Pig Latin translator. Now first, Pig Latin, it says so right here, is a language game where you move the first letter of the word to the end and add an A. So for example, the word Python, we move the first letter, which is P, in the end and then add an A, so it would read as Python. So to explain the last code, I'm just going to go to the end of the activity. So again, this activity combines everything that I learned in the previous one. So first, I created a pig variable that contains the A string. Now an original variable that contains the input of the user or the word that the user will enter. Now an if conditional is used. Now if the length of the user's word or the original is greater than 0, meaning he or she entered a word, and original that is alpha, by the way, is evaluates if the variable is truly a word. If this statement is true, what's going to do is to create a variable that is word that will contain a lowercase version of the original, and then a first variable that will contain the first letter of the word. This right here, the one in the square brackets, is an index. Now a new word variable is created that would add the word, this word right here, plus the first variable plus our A. So And then new word is reassigned with, again, the old new word, and then its index that starts with its one index and until the whole length of the new word, and then it finally prints the new word. Else, now else here stands for if this condition is not true, or if the user didn't enter a word or didn't enter anything at all, the program will just print empty. So let's try this out. I'm going to type in Python, and then it returns iPhone. Next, we have functions, which include the functions lessons and taking a vacation activity. Here in functions, of course, functions are introduced, modules or importing modules, and Python's built-in functions. So first of all, what are functions? Well, functions are very useful if you want to reuse a code, either long or short, and you want to add some additional touches or different values in a different one. So instead of just retyping the whole code again, you can just use a function that you've already made. So to summarize everything that I've learned here, I'm just going to go through here in the review. So to create functions, simply type in the term def and then your function name, the name of your function, and then inside its parentheses is its argument. Next, in importing modules, it's easy. You simply use the terms from and import. Now here in this one, math is the general module and the sqrt is a specific function inside the math module. Lastly, in the built-in functions of Python, I was introduced to max, min, and abs. Now max chooses the highest value in whatever you put inside its parentheses. In min, of course, it does the opposite. It chooses the lowest value. And in the abs function, what it does is it returns the absolute value of, again, whatever you put inside its parentheses. So here in taking a vacation, defining functions is what is practiced. Now the main theme of this activity, by using a metaphor of taking a trip. Now, for example, when we take a trip, we have separate costs. Like here, as shown in the program, we have hotel costs, we have the plane ride costs, and we have transportation to worry about. Now, what we want to know is the total of all these expenditures, but considering that each of these expenditures have their own computations. In this case, in the program, it has its own, as we can see, it has its own math operations, it has its own conditional statements, like so right here, and even comparators. So using functions, instead of rewriting all of this just to add them all to get the total, we can just create a separate function that says the trip cost. And what it does is that it takes our previously made functions right here, and it simply adds all of them. So the entirety of this program clearly shows how convenient and easy it is to use functions in programs such as this one. Number 5 is lists and dictionaries, which include Python lists and dictionaries and a day at the supermarket. Here in Python lists and dictionaries, of course, lists are introduced, their capabilities and functions, and also dictionaries. Now, to summarize, lists are simply also a kind of data type that you can store in a variable. Now, what they do is that they store a collection of different pieces of information inside a square bracket. Now you can access one item in a list by using an index. Now an index, it looks like this, like how I mentioned them before. It uses a square bracket and you put in a number or the index of the list. Now the counting of a list starts with 0 instead of 1. So if you want to access the first item in a list, type in 0 instead of 1. Now the different capabilities and functions of lists are: you can slice them like this, the first one being where you want the slice to start and the second one where you want the slice to end. You can also sort out the sequence in a list. You can iterate a list using a for loop. Now in dictionaries are similar to lists, but instead of using square brackets, it uses curly brackets, and instead of having one item, it has a key with a value separated with a colon. Here in A Day at the Supermarket, before the main mini project begins, the for loop is better explained. So here in the example, this is a basic look of the for loop. Now what this means is that for every name in names meaning this list right here, what that does is that it goes through all the items in the names list before it executes the code under it. So for every name in names, print the name. So if I hit save and submit code, it would print all the names in the list. Now I'm gonna go to the end of the activity and explain what is happening in the code. So what I did first in this activity is to create a shopping list, which includes here as shown banana, orange, and apple. Now 2 dictionaries are made, the first one named as stock and the second one named as prices. Now they both have the same keys but different values. Of course, in the prices, their values are their prices, and in the stock, their stocks. So the important one here is the defined function. This function computes the total bill of the items here in the shopping lists. So first, the total is equal to 0, and then a for loop is used. So what it says is for every n in food here means the shopping list. Food is just the term used for the argument in this function. Now for every n in food, it will go through all the items here in the shopping list. If the stock n, that means if the item here in the shopping list is in the stock dictionary, what it will do is that the total would be added to the price, to the corresponding price of whatever item is written here in the list. And then what happens, now this is interesting, is that if that corresponding item is also in the stock, what it will do is that it will subtract 1 in the stock, and then this ends with the return total, which will return the total of my shopping list bill. Number 6 is student becomes teacher, which is a bit different because it only has one sub lesson. Now this is mostly a learning activity that makes use of lists and dictionaries. Now, student becomes the teacher is a great activity to practice using lists and dictionaries. So to quickly go over this, I will go to the end and show the final code of this mini project. Now, the main objective of this project is to get the average of every student, and then get the class average and its letter grade. Now, first we can see that there are 3 dictionaries named Lloyd, Alice, and Tyler. Obviously, these 3 are the students in the class for this program. Now, they all have the same keys, but with different values. Now, down here we have 4 different functions. I will not be going through them in detail, but I will explain what they do. So in the first function, which is average, that takes the numbers argument, what this does is that it takes the numbers here in every list, here the values of these keys, and it gets each of their average. Next here is the get average. Now this one takes the total average of each dictionary or each student. And then here in the get letter grade function, it uses if conditional statements and elifs to get the letter grade. So for example, if the score, the argument that is taken here, or if the average that the program got from this function is, for example, greater or equal than 90, the letter grade will be A, and so on. Now in this function, it gets the class average by using a for loop, by iterating in the student's arguments. So this uses the get average function to get the whole class average. Now here at the end, I created a students variable with a list of the dictionary names. So when I type in the print get class average with students and print get letter grade get class average students, I will get the total class average and its letter grade, like so. For number 7, lists and functions, we're back with 2 sub-lessons named lists and functions and battleship. Here in lists and functions, the first part, the first half, is just a recap of the uses of lists and functions to better introduce more complex ways in using them. Like here, we can use functions with lists. In here, we can use an entire list in a function, and here we can use lists of lists in functions. So I will not be going through all of them in detail, but I will choose one for each to at least explain what I have learned from them. So here first is passing a list to a function. Simple enough. What this does is that we simply pass the argument of a function with a list. So as you can see here, the name of our list is n, and our function takes in the argument of x. So when you print in the function name with its argument as n instead of x, n meaning this list, it would take in the list. So with this, we have passed the list to a function. Here and using the entire list in a function, we can again pass a range into a function. Most of the concepts here are about also passing lists into function. So we can see here we have a defined function named myFunction that takes the argument of x. Now we used a for loop here and a specific code underneath it. Now for the print, we pass in the function the range. So when we take it, this is the list here. This is the formula of the list, and we just passed it here in the function. Last, we have here this one, using a list of lists in function. Now it's obvious to see that we can create lists within a list. And what's interesting is that if you look at the function right here, we could also see a for loop within a for. So it's like a combination of for and fors in lists and lists. Here in Battleship, I created a program version of the classic board game Battleship. So how this works, I will simply read this. In this version of the game, there will be a single ship hidden in a random location on a 5x5 grid, and the player will have limited guesses to win the game. So I will be going through the end of the code so we could see the final look of the code. So in this program, the lists, conditionals, and functions were evidently used. So from here I imported the random function from the random module so that the program will randomly choose a position in the 5x5 grid. To create the 5x5 grid, a function like this, so a for loop and a function like this were created, and then to use the randint function, two functions were created, one for the row of the board and two for the column of the board. Now the whatever is returned from here in these two functions is stored in a variable called ship underscore row and ship underscore call. Now under this here, every code inside this for loop is how the game will turn out for the player. So we can see here that the range is up until 4 only, meaning that the player will only have limited guesses. And for our first variables, we have guess row and guess call that takes in an integer input from our player. Now here, if and else are used to create conditions that would say if the player wins, or if the player guessed a wrong value, or if they guessed it already, or if they missed the battleship. So I will save and submit the code and try to play this. So to try out the outside the ocean print, I will type in 6 since that's out of the 5x5 grid. We can see that printed, and then let's try guessing more. I didn't win the game, but there you go. The program works perfectly. Number 8, we have loops, and beneath that include loops and practice makes perfect. Here in loops, while loops were introduced, for loops were recapped, and new ways to use for loops were explained. So first, the while loops. Now the while loop is similar to the if statement. It will only execute if the condition is true. The only difference is that the if statement only executes once, but the while loop will continuously execute as long as the condition given is true. Now next is here, the for loops were just recap, so I'm not gonna go through it again, but here there are a few ways that for loops can be used, but since there's a number of them right here, I'm just going to choose some of them and explain what I know from them. Now here it says looping over a dictionary. Now since we can loop over lists, of course we can also loop over dictionaries, but typing them is different than lists. For dictionaries, using a key term, storing a key term is needed so that both the keys and values will appear when you loop into them. Next is the for or else. This was the first time that I knew that for loops can have else statements too, but it works differently than with an if statement. So I'm just going to read here. In this case, the else statement is executed after the for, but only if the for ends normally. So in this code, since we have here if f is equal to tomato, print a tomato is not a fruit, this part here will execute instead of this one, because here in our list a tomato appears. So that's how an else statement works for our for loops. This section of Codecademy's Python course is by far the hardest one for me to go through, because in all of the activities here, they would give the most minimal instruction for me to do. Well, that is very helpful for me to practice my knowledge in programming and applying that here. I've also realized that when I was going through these activities, that I still haven't mastered them, because almost half of the activities here were very challenging for me. So since there's a lot of this, I will not be going through them in detail, but I will share some experiences that happened to me while doing these activities. So for fun with numbers, all the activities under this subsection were particularly easy, especially this one, the first one, because all I needed to do was to create a function that will take a number x as input. So what I did is here is even is the name of the function, and then x is its argument or parameter, and under that is an if conditional statement. So if x modulo 2 is equal to 0, so this means anything that is divisible by 2, which is an even number, will return true, and any otherwise it will return false. That's an easy one. And so for the others, I did well in them, especially the activities in fun with numbers. But when I went here and string it together, when I started doing this, I began to start asking for help here in the Q&A forums here in Codecademy. So since there are some cases that right here that says you may not use reverse or this to help you with this, so there are some cases where I'm limited with what I can do. So whenever I feel stuck, I would ask for help in the Q&A forums. The hardest for me to take was the activity median, because of the formula right here, this math formula right here. I simply could not figure this part out. So the upper part here was easy, obviously, since all I needed to do was that. But this part right here was a huge problem for me to figure out. So in the end, I ended up asking for help in the Q&A forums again. Number 9 is exam statistics, which only has one activity named exam statistics. Exam statistics is like an activity lesson, like the student becomes teacher section. So in this mini project, defining functions and using for loops are highly practiced. So the objective is to get the average, the variance, and the standard deviation of the list of grades given right here. So to start getting the average, we need to get the sum first. So a function for the sum is created by having a total variable and then a for loop, which means that for every grade in the grades, the total will have every grade there, and then it'll return the total. So that's the function for the sum. And next is for the average, which would contain the sum of grades right here and then divided by a floated length of the grades list, and then we would finally get the average. Next is for the variance, which needs the grades average here as well, and then in the for loop, that's where the formula for getting the variance lies within. And for the standard deviation, we created another function, and under that code is again the variance from the previous function multiplied by 0.5, which is the formula to getting the standard deviation. And finally, we got all the needed answers with just by creating each one of them a function. Number 10 is Advanced Topics in Python, which includes Advanced Topics in Python and Introduction to Bitwise Operators. Advanced topics in Python include iterationation, list comprehensions, list slicing, and lambdas. So in iterationation, we have iterators for dictionaries. So we have three functions that could do that. The first one is the items, which calls all the keys and values of a dictionary. The second one is the keys function, which calls all the keys in the dictionary, and values functions, which calls all the values in the dictionary. In list comprehensions, we have a basic look for a list comprehension syntax, something that looks like this, which says I for I in range 51 if I modulus 2 is equal to 0, being I being every number in this range. Next one is the list slicing. Now, list slicing is simple. So for example, you have a list, which is in a list comprehension syntax. If you want to slice, it would have to look like this. Now, it has three numbers with colons. The first number is where you want to start your slice. The second one is where you want to stop your slice. And the third one is how you want your slice to skip numbers. So in this case, it wants to skip every other number in the list. So the last one is the lambdas. Now, lambdas were quite confusing for me at first, but it's really just relatively easy. So a simple syntax of a lambdas looks like this. So it uses a filter and then lambda x equals to Python languages x being what you want to filter in the languages list, which is right here. So the list name should be here, and a x should be what you want to filter in the list that you choose. So in this section, the binary system and bitwise operators are introduced. So the binary system, originally when we count numbers, we count with 10 values, 0 to 10, and then we repeat the numbers. But in the binary system, we only have two values to count with, 0 and 1. So most computers count with the binary system, and they're called bits, a series of zeros and ones. So in Python, there are a number of bitwise operators that are used for binary numbers. So these are the shifts, the AND, the OR, the XOR, and the NOT. So I'm going to explain each of this as that were explained in the next parts of the lesson, but I will just stay here and explain what I learned and understood. So the left and right shifts, they shift the bits or the ones in the numbers by a designated number of slots. So the number after this symbol, this means a right shift and this means a left shift. So the number after the symbol, it means how many times you want your bits to shift, either in the right or in the left. Next is the AND. Now the AND compares two values, like for here the example is 8 and 5, so it compares two values and returns a number with bits that are turned on if both the numbers corresponding bits are 1. So just like in Boolean comparators, if it's AND, both should be true. In here, both corresponding bits should be 1. In the OR operator, what it does is that it functions the same as the AND, but instead of both numbers being 1, either should be fine. So just like in the Boolean operator, where either, as long as either is true, it's true. So here, as long as either is 1, it will return a number, a corresponding number that have bits that are turned on. So next is the XOR. Now this compares two values and then turns on the numbers if either's bits are 1, but it should not be both. So either one should only have 1 as a bit or turned on as a bit. Last is the NOT operator, and what this does is that it simply flips the bits. So for example, if the ones are turned to zeros and the zeros are turned to ones. So if I click the save and submit here, all of these numbers, all of the binary versions of these decimal numbers are the solutions to this right here. Number 11 is Introduction to Classes, with Introduction to Classes and Classes. So, Introduction to Classes. This section taught me almost everything about classes and what I could do with them in Python. Classes were a little harder to understand at first since they require more functions than usual. But basically, it explains here that a class is just a way of organizing and producing objects with similar attributes and methods. So defining a class is much like defining a function, still with different aspects here and there. So a basic look of a class syntax somehow looks like this. It includes a class term, the animal being the class name, the object as its inherit, and the init function, which initializes the object it creates, and the self as its arguments. Another thing that we could do with a class is to inherit it. Right here, it looks like something like this. Right here is an example of a class inheriting a parent class. In this section, classes and its inheritance aspect are being recapped, but with adding more of its complexity this time. The lesson was mostly spent on reviewing what I already learned in the previous one, with adding more intricate details by doing a step-by-step mini project with A, which is right over here, with a car object, with a car class, and an electric car class. So one of the things I have learned in this is that you can create a similarly named function in the parent being this class, the first class right here, and the child class that inherits the first class. But they both have different functionalities with each other, as for example the function drive car. So in the parent class it has its own function with the same name, but electrical also has that function but with a different functionality. By doing this, it would appear that the newly made function in the child class could override the old one in the parent class. Again, classes appear to be quite complex. Just looking at this code can already confuse someone, even myself, but they are highly relevant when it comes to organizing objects when programming. Number 12 and the final lesson in Codecademy's Python course is the final input and output, which has only one lesson. In this final lesson, what was mostly discussed was how to make a code that can read files from your computer, retain the information, and or write it somewhere else. So this kind of process is called a file IRO, the IRO meaning input or output. And fortunately, Python has quite a number of built-in functions that could do just that. So there was actually a part in this lesson where it had bugs right here, number 5, reading between the lines. I remember doing exactly what the instructions told me to do, but when I hit the save and submit code, it returned an error. Good thing the Q&A forums were there to help to explain what was wrong in the code, and I was able to go through it. So the lessons here had one recurring reminder that, which is right here, that whenever we use the open function to open a file, never ever forget to close it with a dot closed or a close function. Other than those two functions, there is also the write function, which simply writes on a specific file of your choice. So that concludes my Python course in Codecademy. So completing all the lessons in this Python course was highly time-consuming but very much worth it. Not only was it educational and significantly informative, it was also fun and engaging because of its interactive aspect. While I cannot confidently say that I have completely mastered programming with the Python language, I can assuredly say that I know enough that I would be able to create mini programs of my own, and maybe even impress some of my friends with it.